Hello and welcome to Rome Reports Premium. I'm Sean Patrick Lovett. This is our appointment to talk about things that we consider particularly pertinent to this particular moment in time. And to help us do so, we invite into this conversation inspiring individuals from all over the world. We have a wonderful group for you today, and we've chosen to talk about something we think is pertinent to the time of Lent. Lent is a time of reflection, a time of introspection, a moment to think about things we wouldn't always think about. And one of those is the consecrated life. No, I promise we won't be whining and complaining about lack of vocations or the horrors of a secularized society. On the contrary, I personally hope that by the end of this conversation, you two will be as convinced as I am that the consecrated life has never gone out of fashion. And so to help us with their experiences are three very convincing and dare I say, fashionable consecrated persons, and one who's discerning whether to join them or not. They come from the United States and from Ireland and from the Philippines and from New Zealand, and they reflect the infinite variety that is our Catholic Church. I'm going to start by introducing you to Sister Pat Murray. She's Irish, and she's been a member of the Institute of the Blessed Virgin Mary, also known as the Loreto Sisters, for how many years, Sister Pat?
Let's say 50-something years.
I mean, let's say 50-something.
I'm not good at subtraction at this point in time.
So we're rounding out the
But I'm
numbers.
rounding up. Yes, I am indeed.
So you've celebrated your Golden Jubilee.
I've celebrated my Golden Jubilee. Yes, and I entered at 18 years of age in Dublin.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
We'll be getting back to you in a moment. You've been involved in teacher formation all over the world, and you're currently the executive secretary of the UISG. What exactly does the International Union of Superiors General do?
It's an organization for all the leaders of women's congregations worldwide. So we have almost 2,000 superiors general or congregational leaders, and they would represent in turn about 700,000 sisters on the ground. So part of the role of the UISG is to support these women in their leadership, and also to promote exchange, reflection on religious life in the world today, and also where there are needs to respond together. We also liaise with various Vatican departments or dicasteries about religious life and about the response of sisters in various areas of ministry and mission throughout the world. So it's a very interesting organization to belong to.
One of those needs regards South Sudan. I know you're among the founders of an organization I'm very fond of. It's called Solidarity with South Sudan, and they share an office with you, don't they?
That's right. So, and I was actually the first director of the Solidarity with South Sudan project. That was my ministry for 6 years, but I was involved over a 10-year period in actually bringing this initiative to birth. It's a very interesting initiative because it brings together male and female religious, so priests, sisters, brothers, to work together in South Sudan, and particularly in the area of teacher education, training of nurses and midwives, also training pastoral workers, and helping others in the area of agriculture. And I think it's one of the roles in my life that should change my life. Because when I went to Sudan, South Sudan, it was Sudan at that stage in 2006, I was so struck by the lack of everything. You know, years ago, I read Willa Cather's has a book called Oh Pioneers. And in it, she refers to Nebraska as not a country, but the material from which a country can be made. And that was my experience in South Sudan. There was no infrastructure. There were only 50 miles of paved road in a country the size of France and Germany combined. There was no electricity outside of a very small number of towns. The people had been displaced not once, not twice, but in many cases 3 and 4 times. And when we went there on that first visit, I was so struck by the people saying, we thought the world had forgotten about us. We thought the church had forgotten about us. So there are parts of the world, in a sense, where that kind of cry comes. You know, do you remember us? Even today, I was talking to somebody from Myanmar who said, I hope the world is remembering us. I hope the world is praying for us at this time.
Thank you for reminding us, and Myanmar certainly is in our prayers, as are the people of South Sudan. Father Gerard Francisco Timoner is the 88th Master of the Order of Preachers, best known as the Dominicans. He's from the Philippines, and as such is the first Asian to step into the shoes of Saint Dominic de Guzman as head of the order. What's the pressure like, Father Gerard?
That's a very difficult question. What's the pressure? No, yes, there is pressure, but we all know that we are here because of God's grace. And I have the brothers who are with me in the General Curia helping me in this special ministry. And you are right that, yes, the first Asian, which tells us, the universality of the church, that leaders of the church can actually come from all over the world because the church is universal.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think your election took place in Vietnam.
That's correct.
Is that right? What does that say about vocations coming from Asia?
Okay, Vietnam is a very interesting place for the celebration of our general chapter for many reasons. Number one, in Asia, the province of Vietnam has the most number of brothers. Close to 400 brothers, friars, where Christianity is a mere 7% of the entire population. Vietnam remains to be a communist country, but with a very vibrant religious life. The Catholic Church is very strong. When Catholics talk about their people, they're not talking only about the Catholics, but everybody, all the members of the Vietnamese society. It's also interesting because in Vietnam, we have 125,000 members of the Dominican laity. And you heard correctly, 125,000. Because the Dominican family is like a microcosm of the church, even in terms of, membership. So the biggest number of the members of the Dominican family are the Dominican laity, just like in our church. Second would be the apostolic sisters. And then next would be the contemplative nuns. And we have 194 monasteries and 2,500 contemplative nuns all over the world. And then, we are just about 5,000 friars, but we also have the Dominican priestly fraternities. These are diocesan priests and bishops who are members of the Dominican family. And we have the Dominican youth movement as well. So look at the Dominican family as a sort of a microcosm of the church. Vietnam is interesting because it shows us very clearly that in Vietnam, Dominican preaching is predominantly lay. And that is how the church, I think, should be.
Well, there you go. You've given me a series of topics for future webinars, Father Gerard. So I think I'll do one on the contemplative life, never out of fashion, and lay people certainly in leadership positions in the church. Thank you for that. I'm taking notes. Good, but we have other people to introduce. Deacon Hayden Poeck is from New Zealand. He recently professed his perpetual vows in the Society of Mary, better known as the Marists, and he hopes to be ordained to the priesthood later this year. Isn't that right, Hayden?
Yeah, that's right. That's correct. Of course, whether I can get back to New Zealand or not is another question, but I'm hoping that I am able to. Yeah. So it's been a wonderful experience. Our formation is very rich and diverse. I start with philosophy in New Zealand, and then novitiate in the Philippines, in Davao. And then, yeah, so I can see the smile there from Father Gerald.
And from me, I've also been to Davao, and we know who comes from Davao. And so, yes, go ahead.
And then we do theology in Rome. So I'm doing the beginning of my license. I've just graduated from the Gregorian, and I'm at the Angelicum now. So I'm missing class, Father Jared. So perhaps you could excuse me.
Put in a good. Remember, for those who are uninitiated, you should know that what Hayden has just said. He's studying at what's called the Angelicum. Its official name is the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, which is run by the Dominicans, and by virtue of being head of the order, Father Jared is the Grand Chancellor. So I guess he could put in a good word for you if you ask him nicely. Hayden, just listening to that, I mean, the privilege. So from New Zealand to the Philippines to Rome, I mean, it truly, the adage of join the consecrated life and see the world.
Well, certainly is a big draw card in today's very universal church. The consecrated life has a wonderful possibility in today's world to see and experience so many different cultures, different ways of living the faith. And certainly I'm very enriched by the people I've met, the faith that I've seen and lived. So yeah, I'm very grateful for what I've received. Yeah.
So when Pope Francis tells us to go to the peripheries, there's no excuse. Yeah. You've already been and come back.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sylvia Messing, sorry to leave you to last, but you're one of my star turns on this conversation. You're from Michigan in the United States, but you live in Northern Virginia. I don't know why I'm saying this. I mean, you could tell us just as easily. How cold is it in Northern Virginia right now?
Actually, it's beautiful here right now. Today's the warmest day we've had yet this new year, and it's actually getting up to 60 today. So the sun is shining. There's still snow on the ground, but definitely not as cold as it's been. It was more like 40s with a high for a while, 30s even. So we've had some cold weather, but nothing like Michigan. So yeah, I'm used to this. So yeah.
Michigan, you have to dig your way out the front door.
Yeah, sometimes, yeah. And we just got a big snowstorm back home. My family was telling me about it just last week, I think it was. So yeah, definitely. They were talking about how it's like halfway up the door, basically, or maybe a little less. But yeah, it's good to have those updates too. So yeah, but the weather here is great.
Just to continue, just to tell other people your business, you have a degree in theology from Christendom College, where you currently work as their special events coordinator. You're the one person in our group who's not a consecrated religious, at least not yet. But you are discerning a vocation. How far are you along that path of discernment, Sylvia?
Great. Well, really not very far, but so much further than I was before, and just my openness to the vocation in general. Like, what does that mean, and what does it mean in a consecrated life? I've been exploring the possibility of doing missionary work. I've also been thinking more and more about religious life, and that I could be called to that, and that I'm not afraid of it as I used to be. And it's still something that's intimidating in some ways, because you're discerning all these things and all your desires and whatnot. But I feel very blessed that the openness that I have to it, and even the interest now that wasn't there before. So I haven't visited many orders yet or anything. I just went on a retreat for the month of January. It was kind of a retreat, and it was also, I was going more as like a break from work, a refresher. So I'm very privileged to work on a Catholic campus and have the sacraments available every day. There's always confession and masses, and my family has instilled the practice of daily prayer. And so I'm very blessed to have so much of my faith surrounding me here. And yeah, my going on this retreat type thing was, if nothing else, I was looking at it more as a good break from work, not necessarily as a retreat experience, but it definitely was both of those. So yeah.
Well, not to put any pressure on any of you, but we may want to keep in mind, I'm certainly keeping in mind that there will be people who are watching us right now. I know who you are, who might be discerning a vocation right now and are listening very carefully to what you say. And you're very welcome, and thank you for joining us. And we're looking forward to your questions and comments during the course of this conversation. You're as much a part of the conversation as our guests are today. So let's jump in immediately, shall we, to the topic. And the topic is the consecrated life, never out of fashion. A moment ago, Sylvia, you said part of your discernment was working out what that means. And so I think a good place to start might be to decide what does the consecrated life mean? I think for a lot of people, it might conjure up images of long periods spent on your knees in prayer, or wearing drab habits, or bad food. But what does the consecrated life mean to those of you, Sister Pat, who've been a consecrated person for over 50 years? Sister Patricia?
Myself, sorry. With regard to consecration, it's really about committing your life to Christ in as full a way as possible, because obviously by baptism, baptism consecrates us, it puts us into the Christian community, and we have a commitment to grow as a disciple. But by consecrating oneself in religious life, certainly I was taking on living the vowed life, living the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, living that in a community context, and also in a context that would look on the meaning of the vows and our community life in the context of the world and its needs. So at the heart is the following of Christ. And then, like that's part of every baptized person's way, but equally saying, I will do this through the vows, through my commitment through the vows, and also through my community life, in a particular community, which has a charism, or we might say a special flavor of the gospel. I mean, the community that I belong to was founded by a woman called Mary Ward, an English woman in the early 1600s, who had a vision for women and the church of her day, and also saw that, in a sense, faith development and helping people seek meaning in their lives was crucial. So she really wanted to engage in faith formation and in the formation of the whole person. And that was a challenge at a time when, for example, women weren't educated, and they were certainly in living in a very unequal way within society. And she saw a role where men and women together would live a full life, both in the church and in the world. And that vision of this particular way of living the consecrated life has inspired me.
Father Gerard, I know it's an obvious question, but it's precisely because it's obvious that I have to ask it. But how old were you? What attracted you to the consecrated life, and what keeps you faithful as a consecrated person?
Okay, there are so many questions too. My answer is a footnote to Sister Patricia's response, because she already gave the theology of consecrated life. But going back to vocation, when people ask me what is your vocation story, I would tell them, I came to the order because of a typographical error. We have heard a lot of times that God writes straight through crooked lines. In my case, it was a typographical error. I wanted to be a diocesan priest. I wanted to enter just to be a diocesan priest. My younger brother is a diocesan priest right now. Of course, he is still a diocesan priest. And then I heard a lot of good things from my father and my sister, eldest sister, about the Jesuits, because they are alumni of this Jesuit university in the Philippines, the Ateneo. And then I said, I wanted to be a Jesuit. My grandparents said, they will send you away. You will go to the missions. We do not want you to be far from us. So I said, okay, then I want to go to the National Seminary, the Central Seminary of the University of Santo Tomas in Manila. I did not know that it is under the care of the Dominicans. I asked for a recommendation letter because I cannot get into the seminary without a recommendation letter. I could not get it from our diocesan bishop because of a certain misunderstanding between him and my father. Very complicated story. So the next option is to go to the neighboring bishop, the archbishop, the Metropolitan Archbishop, Leonardo Legaspi, OP. And then the letter that he wrote was a recommendation letter addressed to the provincial. And then I asked my father, why should I go to Santo Domingo when I want to go to Santo Tomas? My father said, perhaps the way to Santo Tomas is through Santo Domingo. And the rest is history. So when people ask me how I got into the order, it was a typographical error.
And a very wise father. A very wise father.
That's correct. And of course, looking back through the eyes of faith, we say, well, it's not really us, it's who plan our lives, it's really God, through these little accidents in our lives. And we are all familiar with the parable of this treasure hidden in the field that one stumbles upon. You are not really looking for it, you just stumble upon it. Or this merchant who is really ardently searching for fine pearls. And our vocation stories are like that. We really just do not know, and our lives are not really in our hands. That is what we learned. I'm sure Sister Patricia knows more about this.
We also want to hear about the young generation. We want to hear about a young man who is born in a place called New Zealand, which I visited last with a saint called John Paul II in the 1980s, long before Hayden was born. And which is the most gorgeous place. You can go swimming in the morning and skiing in the afternoon. And Hayden, what happened? Was it an encounter? Was it someone you met, something you read? Where did you get your inspiration? Where did the attraction to the consecrated life come from for you?
It's a massive question, really. It's a whole life you're really thinking about. But certainly I felt a call to do something, but the details are always fuzzy, and maybe Sylvia would understand what I'm talking about. So after I graduated, I went to the Solomon Islands to do some mission work, and I met a religious congregation for the first time. My country is very secular, and so encountering these men living in community and really working and living with the people struck a chord with me. Yes, there is a call to religious life, and it's a radical call, but most of discernment is about seeing whether my answer fits, whether I'm burning to respond in this way. So I was with this religious congregation, and I was thinking of joining the one I'm with now, Society of Mary. And the priest I was staying with said, don't join the Maris. Hopefully my superior will forgive me for saying this. He says, don't join the Maris because they are poor and crazy. And I thought to myself, I think I want to be poor and crazy. And hopefully I'm a bit poorer and crazier, but it's about coming to terms with something inside me and responding to this call. So yeah, my discernment has been just revelation from the Lord in a slow sort of confident way. So I feel very blessed.
Sylvia, you were called into question a moment ago, so you've had a few moments to prepare yourself, but you knew that you were going to be called up next. So over to you.
Okay. Well, kind of just my initial thoughts of like consecrated life, I guess the longest time when I thought about what consecrated even meant, I really associated with it sacrifice and everything you have to give up, and just this spirit of sacrifice of like you're giving up your desires, giving up your possessions, giving up your wants, your talents, your strengths. And I know you're probably all laughing right now because you're like, yeah, she had no idea. And I really didn't. I was so wrong about that. And there is an aspect of sacrifice for sure, but not a total like giving up the things that you love and the things that your talents, your strengths. And over time, I realized that really what consecrated and the consecrated life means is it's giving of yourself. It's giving for a purpose, giving to something. And I recognize that this is something, I see these elements in my job even, that it's more of a mindset of sharing your strengths, sharing your gifts, and tapping into those desires, tapping into those wants. Our calling is so uniquely personal, it's so individual, it's so beautiful that God's going to highlight those strengths and those gifts. And also part of this openness really that I've been discovering more and more, even recently, I've seen that with discernment comes so much trust. And I find this particularly difficult. I'm sure many do, but it's always been a spiritual battle to trust God. Like I can say that I love him and I can say that I want to make him happy, but I have a hard time saying that I trust him. And just more recently, I've experienced that there's something I missed when I thought about trust, and that is that God is so incredibly tender with us, and he'll take the desires that we have. If it's me thinking, oh, I want to be a mom and a wife someday, and that's something I really want, those desires, he'll take those desires and gently hold them and help change them if that's what his will is. And it's not going to be something drastic. It's not going to be something where he's ripping that away from us and saying, no, you can't have this. It's going to be something that in time we want. And I've seen that in my own life. I've seen that change, and just understanding his tenderness, that sometimes it's so subtle, we don't even see him doing it. We don't even, like Deacon Poeck said, like, we don't even necessarily know when it happens, when that transition of we're open to it all of a sudden, or we want it all of a sudden. And I think that's so true and so powerful, but we need to understand his tenderness, because that allows us to trust him, that he's going to be gentle, and he wants us to acknowledge our wants, our gifts, our desires. Like those are gifts from him, and he wants us to acknowledge them. So, and that being said, I guess the consecrated life to me, I view it much more now as something not that we're giving up. I understand it as us giving to, in giving for a distinct purpose in a beautiful way, because I can do that in my job. I can give of my talents and grow as I'm here. But in the consecrated life, there's also an element of the sacred, and how cool that we can do that with a life like that as well. So yeah, anyway.
How cool indeed. Thank you, Sophie. I'm going to write that down. Not a giving up, but a giving to. That's lovely. Thank you. I want to go back to our title. It's a provocation, of course, but I think the question inherent in the title is, does consecrated life have to be fashionable in order to be attractive? I think in my own experience, I'm a pre-Vatican Council child. My first teachers were Irish Dominicans. God bless Sister Stanislaus, born in a farm in Kilkenny, Sister Stanislaus, with her huge rosary beads and full wimple. How has consecrated life changed, Sister Pat? And does it have to be fashionable to be attractive?
That's an interesting question, because I was reflecting, when I joined the Loretto Sisters in 1965, when I entered, as we would use that word, it was never to go home. Because at that stage, the community was an enclosed community, because as were many religious orders at that time. even though the desire of the founders had been that the sisters would be in the heart of life, responding to the needs of people. But if you like, the form of religious life was seen very much as a monastic form. And since Vatican II, cutting a long story very short, in a sense, as religious orders went back and looked at their founding purpose, mine did too, and we began to see where we were called to be, both individually and corporately. So gradually things changed. And I suppose one of the visible things that changed was the habit. Now, not all communities made that change, because that, as we've been talking about discernment, that's a discerned choice as to what's appropriate in the light of the particular life form that the community is living. So these are decisions taken along the way. But it was much more, I think, in terms of ministry that the real substantial change has happened for many. We would have been a congregation focused on teaching, and that's where the majority were. Now, if I look at the sisters, we're everywhere there's need, because in a sense, you're always an educator. When you're a mentor or a spiritual director or somebody working in prisons or accompanying people who are ill in hospital, or leading Bible study or being in a Bible study group, in a sense, we're, something that was said earlier, we're giving, but we're receiving. I'm more and more convinced, the challenge of the gospel that, that we're called to the margins. We're called to the margins, yes, for the sake of those who are neglected and forgotten. But in reaching out there, something happens to ourselves and we're transformed. So if I look at my own religious family, I think we've been deeply transformed in moving out. We're still in education in many parts, but we're also moving out to many other and new needs in the world. And in that, we're being transformed because there's a journey of discernment, both individual and as a community. So religious life evolves. It evolves by listening to the call of God and the call of God's Spirit in the world, leading us forward. And, Pope Francis would often say that, a charism or a founding spirit isn't static. It's something that has to be interpreted, listened to. And I'm very struck, the spirituality of my congregation is that of St. Ignatius of Loyola. We're like the Jesuits. We're a female equivalent of the Jesuits. And it's fine. Ignatius would talk about finding God in all things. And in a sense, that's what we try to help people do, to find God in all things in life, in the good things and in the not so good things, in the messes and the disappointments and the failures. But first of all, we have to do that ourselves. So you journey yourself in this loving relationship with God, finding the golden thread of God's word and God's message through what happens to you in life.
Father Jared, you're the master of one of the world's oldest, and with all due respect to my Jesuit and Franciscan friends, one of the most prestigious religious orders. How have the Dominicans changed literally over the centuries?
Yeah, when I was a young religious in the Philippines, I introduced myself as a Dominican. And the reply that I heard was, "You're medieval." And my reply was, "No, we are not medieval, we are classical." Because the notion of the classical, this is not my idea, this is from Hans-Georg Gadamer. The classical, a classic is timeless, precisely because it is always timely. So it is not timeless because it is exempt from, history, but because it always has something to say in each period of history. So the order of preachers is, of course, the charism is the preaching of the gospel. By the way, there is only one invitation of the Lord Jesus, come follow me. And there are so many ways by which we respond to that invitation. So many ways. So it's like the one and the many. And that is the beauty of, the consecrated life and Christian life, in fact, in general. Now, the preaching of the gospel is classical. It is always timely. And because it is timely, it has become timeless. When we look at different epochs in history, for instance, we can see that the preaching of the gospel is exemplified in a person like Fra Angelico, who preached through the beauty of his paintings, through arts, through aesthetics. But we can also see the preaching of the gospel in the figure of a Catherine of Siena, a very strong woman who could dare to tell the Pope, Holy Father, if you are man enough, go back to Rome. A very strong woman. Or you can see that, of course, in Thomas of Aquinas or in Albert the Great. But we also see that in people like Bartolomé de las Casas and Francisco de Vitoria, who is acknowledged even by the United Nations as the founder of international law, as an acknowledged theologian and philosopher who conceived of universal human rights. We see that in the many missionaries who came from Europe, crossed the Atlantic to the Americas. Some of them died crossing the Atlantic and crossing the Americas, then going to the edge of the Pacific and then crossing the Pacific to Asia. We are celebrating 500 years of the first baptism and Eucharist in the Philippines. And many of these missionaries, many of them died along the way. And when they bid goodbye to their friends, they would say, ad vitam aeternam, see you in heaven, because there is no coming back. There is no coming back. So these are the different, figures and images of the Dominican family. We also see that in Blessed Margarita di Città di Castello, a disfigured woman, a daughter of noble parents, but they were so ashamed of her that they almost like imprisoned her, even threw her away. So she was disfigured, she was limping with one eye, the figure of the rejected in our society. And she became a Dominican sister, and now she is a blessed. Hopefully she will become a saint soon. A good figure of, somebody who was rejected and yet choose not to reject people, because she was so close to people who were also rejected like her. So there are so many images, and these are all images of preaching. In other words, we preach not just by words, but also in different ways by which we are able to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ, through the arts, through theology, through philosophy, through social concerns like human rights, etc.
You're paraphrasing St. Francis right now, huh? Preach the gospel, if necessary, use words. I'd like to change things around for a moment. I'd like to introduce a new element to our conversation and ask Pope Francis to help us in our reflections by listening to this brief report presented by Rome Reports. It's what Pope Francis had to say on the day dedicated to consecrated life this year.
This procession in the darkness of St. Peter's Basilica marked the beginning of the Mass on the Feast of the Presentation of Jesus in the Temple, which coincides with World Day for Consecrated Life. During his homily, Pope Francis focused on the figure of Simeon, who waited his entire life to meet Jesus. The Pope remarked that Simeon's patience is a reflection of God's patience.
Con pazienza, egli custodisce la promessa, custodire la promessa, senza lasciarsi consumare dall'amarezza per il tempo passato o quella rassegnata malinconia che emerge quando si giunge al crepuscolo della vita?
The Pope also clarified that patience isn't just about tolerating difficulties or showing grim determination in the face of hardship.
La pazienza non è segno di debolezza, è la fortezza d'animo che ci rende capaci di portare il peso, di sopportare il peso dei problemi personali e comunitari. Ci fa cogliere la diversità dell'altro, ci fa perseverare nel bene anche quando tutto sembra inutile.
He urged consecrated men and women to avoid falling into interior sadness and impatience, which he said can lead to despair.
Fratelli e sorelle, la tristezza interiore in noi consacrati è un verme che ci mangia da dentro. Fuggite dalla tristezza interiore.
To conclude, the Pope reminded men and women religious to avoid gossip and to not lose their sense of humor.
Lo sappiamo tutti.
Your body language gave you away there. When the Pope was talking about interior sadness, you were nodding your head. Why?
Are you talking to me? Sorry.
Hayden, yes, I was watching your body language and you were nodding your head. You were listening very carefully when he talked about interior sadness, despondency. Why? Why were you nodding?
Well,
because you agree, or because it's something that you have experienced or expect to experience?
I think the Pope Francis is showing his classic wisdom. I think it's a very real reality in religious life, consecrated life. The generosity, as Sylvia was saying, the generosity to give, and we give in the three evangelical counsels of celibacy, poverty, and obedience. That's a generosity of self-giving. But over time, we can start taking back our generosity and start living consecrated life for ourselves again. And without a deep orientation and conformation to Christ, religious life doesn't make sense anymore. And it can become, sad, it can become interiorly heavy. So every religious has these ups and downs. These are normal parts of life. Every person has them. But unless the consecrated person is always dipping into prayer and conforming himself, the life starts to fall apart and then sadness comes. So it's always about tying yourself back to prayer. So, I think it's a great piece of advice from the book.
And he sounds like he's speaking from the heart, doesn't he? If you watch his body language, it's like everything he says, he's speaking in terms of his own personal experience.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree. As you know, he was a Jesuit, so he was religious himself, a consecrated man. So he is, and so he brings that richness to his pontificate. So that's something that all of us can take, as long as we're uniting ourselves to Christ. The heaviness of the world can't sink deep into us, because there's always the hope of salvation. Of course, that's our Christian hope.
There are a lot of themes. I mean, that was a very short clip, but there are a lot of themes there, as you heard: patience, trust, despondency. He talks about gossip as well. He also talks about a sense of humor. So here we have, we have the two generations. Let's hear from, I hate using the word, the older generation. Should we say the more experienced generation? What are your words of wisdom and advice to the young people, not only in our conversation, but those who are listening to you and watching you right now? Sister Pat, you start, and then I want to hear from Father Gerard.
Yes, I think there's a sense in which we need not to take ourselves too seriously all the time, but also that within religious life itself, it's and the living. And yes, there are the ups and downs, but also I think we have to focus on, for myself, I look at the mustard seeds of goodness and hope and kindness and compassion that I see around me. I think you have to make a positive choice to see where God's Spirit is working in the world and in the community, because it's like everything else. Whatever becomes your focus can either drain your energy or add to your energy. So in my own living, I've also discovered that it's in, I remember reading years ago a phrase which has stayed with me, that it was a Benedictine reflecting on community life, said, God saves us through the chinks and cracks in our armor. And it's in through the chinks and cracks in our armor that God's grace penetrates, and we learn and we're open. So my own learning has been, it's not through the successes of life that really I have felt blessed and graced. Yes, these have been welcomed when they come, but often it's through the mistakes, through my own human weakness, through ways in which I failed. And when I reflected on the M and threw God's light on those, that called me to a much deeper way of living and to a fullness of life that I didn't see before. So there's a graced way, I think, in appreciating those the disappointments. You know, I've got to a certain age in life. You know, I look back and I say, I wish I was better. I wish I was holier. I wish I was more compassionate. But then at another level, I say to myself, but I'm growing in holiness. I'm growing in compassion. I'm not there. I'm on the journey. The journey leads us onwards, and it's through the very struggle that what is to be will emerge. So that gives me a sense of trust in God, but also a trust in myself, that if I'm attentive to the Spirit of God working in me and in the world, that something is unfolding. And
of course, the Pope puts trust and patience together, doesn't he, Father?
Yeah,
Yes, that's correct. I'd like to begin by saying that, well, from our tradition, St. Thomas said, the religious life is a school for the perfection of charity. That's very basic. It is a school for the perfection of charity. And of course, the church also teaches that family life is a school of life and love. So these two directions are very important, but the aim is about love. It's about charity, the perfection of charity. So if religious life is a school for the perfection of charity, then all religious must begin to realize that we are all students, because it is a school. And if it is a school, then there must be teachers. So who are the teachers? The members of our community are also our teachers, because we learn from one another. There are two types of teachers: those who terrorize us in the classroom, you know, the grumpy, the grouchy, and the grumbling teachers. They are our teachers in charity, because they make us realize that we are not yet there. In the school for the perfection of charity, some of us are on the graduate school level, some are college, some are in high school, elementary. Sister Pat probably knows this. There are also those who have already celebrated golden anniversaries in the religious life, and when you look at them, it seems like they are still in kindergarten in terms of the perfection of charity. But they too are our teachers, because they help us, realize that we are not yet charitable. But there are also those whose lives are ennobling, inspiring, and these are also good teachers in the perfection of charity, because the religious life is the following of Christ, sequela Christi, and Christ is revealed as love, according to St. John. In other words, the religious life is really, truly a school for the perfection of charity. There you will experience, the need for patience, the need for trust, everything, because you are living with people from diverse backgrounds, etc. But we are also called what a confer calls as reconciled diversity, because we live together in community. An Irish master of the order, Damien Byrne, probably you know him, Sean.
Absolutely, yes.
In one of his letters, he said, you know, we religious, we need the affection of our brothers and sisters in the community. We need their love, their esteem, their affection. And then he says, if we do not find this in our communities, then we will begin looking for that outside or elsewhere. And I think that is very important for us to realize. And I will end with this. If the religious life is a school for the perfection of charity, then everything about our religious life should be about charity at the center. So obedience, you know, is about listening. It's about, of course, doing what the superior asks us to do it, but it's also about mutual listening to one another. But if the religious life is about the perfection of charity, then the first sin against obedience is the lack of charity.
All right, you brought up the
Chastity.
topic, Father Gerard. No. We only had a few. I know we only have a few minutes left, and we have to address the proverbial elephant in the room. So the question is, how difficult is it to be faithful to the challenge of obedience? You thought I was going to say chastity, didn't you? No. I think chastity is way overrated, and poverty actually I think is quite liberating. Obedience. How hard is it to stay faithful to obedience?
Okay, sorry, but I also want to say that the first sin against chastity is the lack of charity. Because you can be chaste or celibate, but not chaste. If you are grumpy and grouchy to your brothers and to your sisters, you are not chaste. Because how can you preach, you know, God who is love if that is not a life that you live? And the first sin also against poverty is not having possessions. The first sin against poverty is the lack of charity, of not being able to share whatever you have with others. Sorry, but obedience, well, in the church, that is also our problem today. But we don't have the time. But if you want,
no, I'm curious. Yes,
because obedience first of all is about listening. Audire. And in the church, people are talking from different sides, and you know, when people raise their voices, that means they feel that they are not being heard. That is why they need to increase the volume. And we see and we hear loud voices, divergent voices in the church today. I think what we need is obedience in the sense of the capacity to listen. Of course, first to the Word of God, but also the capacity to listen to one another, to truly listen.
Thank you for reminding us, indeed. We have just a couple of minutes, and I'm very curious to hear. Sylvia has been listening. She's been listening very carefully to everything you have to say. Sylvia, you spoke about fear right at the beginning. Listening to these wise people talk to you about poverty and chastity and obedience and charity. Is there any one of those that inspires fear in you?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, I think when I think of, again, the consecrated life and what it means, it can be intimidating at first to think I'm giving up in obedience. I'm giving up my own choices and my own like what I want to do. And in chastity, maybe it's like I'm giving up my own control, like not really, but the sense that I can do whatever I want with my body. And I think that's so common in our secular world right now. And I guess, yeah, like those can be intimidating, but the most beautiful thing to me I haven't thought very much on those specific topics, but just the mentality of trust and how I think that plays a role in any of those gifts, those givings of ourselves. And like I mentioned earlier, I think it's so important to remember God's tenderness in all of this, in any discernment, in any order we're in any state we're in. What does that mean for us? And for me, I've feel like I've experienced this tenderness in a very real way, and it's opened me to the sense of hope, the sense of trust. Really, I think it's the root of my growing strength in trust, if I can say it that way. I'm still far from perfect in trusting God. I'll say that, but I think that understanding His tenderness has been a huge, like, beautiful, profound thing for me to understand that whatever He asks of me, whether it's obedience or chastity, I can do it. Like, I don't know. And I guess even I see that more in my openness in general to discerning religious vocation and missionary work, or whatever it is in that realm. As I want to pursue that, as I want to explore that more and tap into that interest, I just would say that I would encourage everyone to hope and trust in God's tenderness, that He is going to want us to be happy. And He's, even if we don't feel like He's moving in our lives in this specific time or specific moment, to realize that to know that He's there, that He might be so tender that it's so subtle, and that's why we can't see Him moving, but that He is. I don't know, that His tenderness is so real. That's all I got.
What a wonderful affirmation, Sylvia. Chastity, poverty, obedience, I can do that. And what a wonderful reminder also to us, that lovely word tenderness, the tenderness of God that Pope Francis reminds us of so often. God the parent who loves us so unconditionally. Unfortunately, the time is up. I'd love to stay and chat with you all. I've got about 3 more pages of questions here for you. I wanted to hear about your founders. I wanted to hear so much more, but the time has gone by very, very quickly. I'd just like to thank you so much for participating, Father Jared and Sister Pat and Hayden and Sylvia, and to our participants also online. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, I want to thank my cameraman, Marco, and my webmaster, Pamela, and all my colleagues here at Rome Reports, without whom none of this would be possible. So until next time, I'm Sean Patrick Lovett. God bless you and goodbye.